This is something that many people explore, but we are going to explore it in a different way, I believe. And we're going to be faithful to the text, and therefore let me get what I think is the basic issue. All right? And good. There is a discussion about justice and injustice in the Republic. And the participants in the Republic get a little bit upset with Socrates because they say, look here, every time the issue of justice and injustice is discussed, people always confound it with the rewards and benefits that follow or the punishments and the exiles that follow for the other. But no one ever talks about justice just in terms of what it is in itself. No one talks about injustice, what it is in itself. Therefore, they challenge Socrates to consider two people. One, someone who is really masterful in being unjust. This person is perfectly unjust, so much so that he's able to fool everyone, even his wife. And as a consequence, he can do injustice perfectly. That means he's an expert craftsman in his pursuit of injustice. He knows what's possible and he knows what's impossible. Therefore, he always stays within the possible. Whenever he slips, he can recover, and no one is able to discern his injustice. He gains public office. He marries his family into the highest families of the land. He enters into partnerships and contracts. He always succeeds. And he always succeeds in such a way that he always ends up with a greater share because he is so careful in his injustice. Therefore, he reaches the high point in society, and he can benefit friends and he can hurt his enemies. With sufficient money and prestige, he sacrifices to the gods, and he has it from the best priests that they have a banquet for him when he dies, because it's likely then that they too were fooled, and therefore he lives his life as perfect in justice. Now, what they say to Socrates is, now, think of the next man. He, on the contrary, is perfectly just. He is perfectly just, but he appears to everyone as living a life of injustice. He does no wrong, never has done anything wrong. But he has the greatest reputation for injustice. And therefore he gets absolutely no rewards, he gets no benefits, gets no honors. As a matter of fact, in the end of his life, they catch him and he's scourged, racked, chained, his eyes are burnt out, he suffers every misery, and finally he's set up on a pole. They say to Socrates, now Socrates, what we want you to do is to demonstrate to us rationally, no appeal to emotion, no rhetoric of any kind, prove to us that it's better to be this man than this man. And you must do it only under one set of terms. You have to show what each is, justice and injustice, and the benefit each has on the soul of the man who has it. It must reflect back on the impact that justice and injustice has on the soul. And therefore they say, let's strip everything apart from this, and therefore this man who is naked appears naked because there is nothing therefore that he can be associated with that is unjust. And this man has all of the garments of appearing just, so he appears just, but he's unjust. He is just, but he appears unjust. And therefore, the great challenge in the Republic then is, what is the nature of justice and injustice? What each is and the benefit of each. Socrates accepts the challenge, and they go and they repeat it a couple of times. The challenge, what each is, must be explored in itself by its own power, since each has a power, and it must be seen in the soul, and it must be hidden from the gods and men. We must show justice is the greatest good, and injustice the worst evil, and that must be demonstrated in terms of the impact each has on the soul of the man who possesses it. That's the challenge. Therefore, Socrates then sets up an analogy. Now, everything follows from this analogy. This is the central piece of the Republic. Socrates says, look, it's going to be very difficult to explore justice and injustice in the soul of man. What we need to do is see it written large. We have to see it in large, bold letters, as it were. Just as we studied letters as a child, he says. At first, you don't start with little letters. Your teacher shows them large and bold, and then you gain insight into them. You can then see them both in the large and the small. So he says, therefore, what we're going to do is see justice and injustice in the state, because the state is the soul written large. And therefore he comes up with this beautiful analogy. As the soul is to its parts, experiencing both justice and injustice, so too the city-state is to its parts, experiencing both justice and injustice. And therefore Socrates says, let us then build a state. We'll build a state. The parts of the state are going to come out to be exactly as the parts of the soul. Therefore, everything he says about the state will have its corresponding impact on the soul. Therefore, he's going to create a state. He's going to design one. It's called the city-state. Now, at first, he creates an ideal state. And then it's criticized, and he criticizes it himself. He says, that's right. We don't want a true and just state. We want one in high fever. We want a sick state. We want one in high fever. Because we want to see both justice and injustice. Therefore, we need a state that is not ideal, but we have to build a state that is ideal and then disintegrates into an unjust state. In that way, we'll be able to see how the soul of man comes into existence, pursuing justice, and how man then drops down into injustice. And when we do that, then we'll take a look at the effect or the benefit each has on the soul of man, and see what benefits and honors can be said to accompany each. So therefore, he builds a steady state, and everything he says about it, we must transfer to the soul of man. Every statement here must have its correspondence here.
Do you take questions?
Pardon?
Do you take questions during the lecture?
Oh, sure, just so long as they're...
I did on the analysis before, the unjust man that seems just. That seems pretty common. But I have a hard time finding the just man that seems unjust.
Yeah. Well, go ahead with it. You can do it. Yeah, for this dialogue, you need to. Yeah.
You need
to play the game.
Okay.
Yeah, to play the game. You have to.
Well, who made up these descriptions?
All of this is Socrates. This all comes from the Republic. Yeah. Okay. Therefore, what do we need to do? Well, what we need to do through this analysis is to know the true nature of the soul. Now, how can you really discover the true nature of the soul? Now, what I'm going to be doing now is I'm now going to the end of this search in order to explore a few issues so we can then go into the arts and the studies of the philosopher king. What we really need